दुनिया में तूफान आ गया। भारत, उसकी ये हैसियत कि कौन होता है भारत जो परमाणु परीक्षण करे, और दुनिया की आंखें लाल हो गई। दुनिया भर की शक्तियां भारत को दबोचने के लिए मैदान में उतरी।
28 years ago today, on May 11th, 1998, deep beneath the scorching sands of Rajasthan's Pokhran desert, India shook the world. A series of underground nuclear explosions announced something that could no longer be hidden, debated, or denied. India had crossed the nuclear threshold. And today, May 11th, 2026, as India marks another anniversary of those historic tests, the relevance of that moment feels sharper than ever. Because the world around India is once again witnessing coercion, wars, sanctions, regime pressure, and targeting of countries over strategic capabilities. Which is why this is not just a story about nuclear explosions in the desert. It is the story of how India ensured that no global power could ever force New Delhi into strategic submission again. On May 11th, 1998, under the scorching sands of Rajasthan's Pokhran desert, India crossed a strategic threshold that permanently altered its place in global politics. Underground nuclear devices detonated one after another in what came to be known as the Shakti series of 5 nuclear tests. With those explosions, India openly declared itself a nuclear weapons state. No more ambiguity, no more strategic hesitation. India had arrived as an overt nuclear power. And with that single move, New Delhi fundamentally changed how the world would deal with it forever. But Pokhran 1998 did not emerge from nowhere. Its roots stretched back nearly 24 years to the very same desert sands. May 18th, 1974. India conducted its first nuclear test under the codename Smiling Buddha. Officially, India described it as a peaceful nuclear explosion. Then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi maintained it was not weaponization. But the world understood the signal immediately. India had mastered nuclear explosive technology. And the response was swift. Sanctions, technology denial, diplomatic isolation. India was pushed into what many described as the nuclear doghouse. Advanced technology was blocked. Nuclear cooperation dried up. Western countries tightened restrictions. India was effectively locked outside the global nuclear order dominated by the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or the NPT as we know it, a treaty India refused to sign because it viewed it as discriminatory. For years, India paid a heavy economic and technological price for asserting strategic autonomy. But here's the irony. Those sanctions may have hurt India in the short term, but they also forced India to become self-reliant. Cut off from international supply chains, Indian scientists had no choice but to innovate domestically. And that's what they did over the next 2 decades. India quietly built indigenous capabilities across nuclear technology, missiles, space systems, advanced materials, and strategic research. The pressure designed to weaken India ended up hardening it instead. Now then came May 1998. Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee took the political gamble that would define India's strategic future. India conducted multiple nuclear tests under Operation Shakti, and this time there was no attempt to hide behind ambiguity. Soon after the test, Vajpayee wrote to world leaders stating clearly that India was now a nuclear weapons state. He cited worsening regional security conditions and national security compulsions. But he also stressed India's commitment to restraint and responsible behavior. The global backlash came immediately as expected. Then President Bill Clinton famously declared, "We are going to come down on those guys like a ton of bricks." That's what he said. Sanctions returned, financial assistance was curtailed, predictions of India's diplomatic isolation filled global headlines. Many believed that India had made a catastrophic mistake, but something fundamental had changed. India had crossed the point of no return. Its nuclear deterrence was now explicit. And that changed the strategic equation permanently. This is where the comparison with present-day Iran becomes impossible to ignore. Today, the world is watching escalating tensions over Iran's nuclear program, bunker buster bombs, military strikes on nuclear facilities, demands for surrendering enriched uranium, sanctions, sabotage, coercive diplomacy, military action. And many strategic experts believe had India not made its own difficult decisions in 1974, then in 1998, it too could have faced similar pressure. Look at Iraq, for instance. Look at Libya, countries that abandoned or failed to secure strategic deterrence eventually faced devastating external intervention. North Korea, mind you, despite global isolation, has largely escaped a direct military action, largely because it possesses nuclear weapons. But nuclear tests alone were not enough. Possessing the bomb did not automatically bring India international acceptance. That required diplomacy. Sophisticated, patient, long-term diplomacy. And that phase became most visible under Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. Because after decades of nuclear isolation, India achieved something once considered impossible: the Indo-US Civil Nuclear Agreement, the famous 123 agreement. The negotiations were politically explosive and diplomatically complex. But in 2008, India achieved a landmark breakthrough. The Nuclear Suppliers Group granted India a special waiver. For the first time since 1974, India could participate in global nuclear commerce without signing the NPT as a non-nuclear weapons state. That was historic because the world was effectively recognizing India as a responsible nuclear power outside the traditional non-proliferation framework. Manmohan Singh repeatedly argued that India's impeccable non-proliferation record had earned global trust. The deal was not just about reactors or uranium fuel. It was about legitimacy, acceptance, and India's return to the nuclear mainstream without surrendering its autonomy. And under Prime Minister Narendra Modi, India has continued projecting confidence in indigenous capability as the backbone of both national security and foreign policy. On the anniversary of Pokhran this year, Modi said, "No power in the world can suppress or force India to bow down." He recalled how despite sanctions and economic pressure after the 1998 tests, India conducted even more tests later, demonstrating unwavering political will. And perhaps the greatest irony of all of this, the technology denial regimes meant to slow India down actually ended up accelerating Indian innovation. Denied cryogenic engine technology, ISRO developed its own systems. Today, India launches satellites at globally competitive costs. Sanctions did not stop India's missile program either. India developed the Agni missile series, now forming the backbone of credible nuclear deterrence. In fact, on May 8th, just a few days ago, India successfully tested an advanced Agni missile equipped with MIRV technology. multiple independently targeted re-entry vehicles, meaning a single missile can carry multiple warheads aimed at different targets across vast distances. That is an extraordinary leap in strategic capability. And that brings us to the central lesson of Pokhran. Science alone was not enough. Diplomacy alone would not have worked either. It was the fusion of scientific resolve, political courage, and long-term diplomatic negotiation that protected India's strategic autonomy. The nuclear scientists who were working under sanctions, the diplomats fighting uphill battles in global capitals, and the prime ministers who were willing to absorb the political risk. Together, they fundamentally altered India's place in the global order. Because had India delayed, had India outsourced its security, had India hesitated, the story could have been very different. And as the world debates military red lines elsewhere today, India stands protected, not by luck, but by hard decisions taken across decades. Keep watching Times Axis and click on the bell icon below to subscribe to the channel. Stay tuned.